Welcome to episode 322. I know I can count. This is the Defensive Security Podcast. My name is Jerry Bell, and joining me today, as always, is Mr. Andrew Callett.
Hello, sir. How are you?
I am okay. How are you?
I've had a rough week. We lost one of our cats this week, so that's really, really, really tough. Carrying on.
I understand all too
also
well.
In week 3.5 of incident response at work, which again, I still can't talk a lot about, but we could talk around it and we could talk about what's out in the public sphere.
So you're like about to turn into a diamond from all the pressure.
It's been a very, very interesting experience. And, you know, I'm trying to get some downtime to recover where I can and also just go through the grieving process with Betty. But yeah, it's a very, I really hope one day I can at least abstractly share all the lessons, because that's the point of this show. But I have to be ethically and morally honor my current employer and not, as you know, lawyers are all over these things, and every bit of information disclosed must go through a ton of layers of approval, and I need to honor that. But it's very, very taxing. It's not fun. I could tell you, a lot of the work we do day to day, I think, is in preparation for these types of events. And it's why the basics and getting the grind of just trying to get everything right matters so much, because when it goes bad, it's so painful. It's so difficult. And so incredibly taxing for everybody. And not to mention the direct costs, the direct risks to jobs, the direct everything is, it's a very firsthand account of why what we do matters and that the bad guys get a vote.
And the hardest part I always found, because I have been through an unfortunate number of situations.
How many of those did you cause, though? That is always the question.
I mean, my counsel has advised me not to answer that question. What I found, one of the things I found really, really taxing was that, like, the world doesn't stop. Like,
right.
You have to keep doing what you were doing, plus all of the stuff that's associated with addressing the matter at hand. And keeping things secure becomes even more important. And you have to do it at the time where everybody's stretched as tight as a violin string. So that's tough. I feel for you.
Comes with the job sometimes, man. It's part of the gig when you get to a certain level.
So, and by the way, just a quick reminder that the thoughts and opinions we express are ours and not those of our employers. One thing I do want to go back to, like, I don't think anybody should be surprised. And in fact, I would, I would be surprised if people felt comfortable or thought that they would feel comfortable talking about what's going on in that sort of situation with their employer publicly. Like, it's tacky, it's unprofessional and whatnot. So, like, if you ever find yourself in that position, this is to the listeners, right? Quite often you don't know the full story, right? And so if you say stuff out of turn or, whatnot, without all the information, you can really make a mess. And so I just encourage you to kind of go with the program. And obviously we all have to, abide by a sense of ethics. And so if, like, things are not above board, then you should seek the proper remediation or proper channels. But anyway, just don't expect people to start blabbing about what's going on at their work. Jerry's take.
Yeah, there's a lot of reasons for that too. I mean, legally, you never know how these things could in any situation could turn into some lawsuits and such, and you don't want to do anything to imperil the proper outcome, whatever that is.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, yeah, you're right there's always a whistleblower option, but you have to do that properly too. And so, I think some folks who may have a more cavalier attitude will be like, well, if my company did something dumb, I would just go say, tell people and consequences be damned. It's not the way we should be as security professionals. We we have an unsaid oath to honor the ethical constraints of the information that are available to us.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, all you have is your reputation, right? So if you everything you do publicly, especially, contributes to your reputation. So just kind of factor that into how prospective employers might look upon you the next time you're in a job search. So moving on, switching topics, I do want to remind people that we have a beautiful, wonderful YouTube channel that I would sincerely appreciate if you could subscribe to. We'll make sure there's a link to it in the show notes for the podcast. It's on our website. And if you just want to search for it, it's just search YouTube for Defensive Security Podcast, and you'll get there. But like we would love for this to be somewhat self-sustaining in time, and YouTube gives you some abilities to monetize. We're stuck at like 700 followers, so hey, if you could do us a solid, we'd love that. Thank you very much. And also a very special thank you to our Patreon sponsors. Thank you very, very much. You are awesome. And if you do, by the way, want to become a Patreon sponsor, you can do that on our Patreon site is patreon.com/defensivesec. There's a link to that in the show notes and on our website as well. We do release episodes a week ahead of time for our Patreon sponsors. So that is an important benefit. And once some of this crazy gets past us, we're going to get back talking about some live stream stuff. And so I'm here at my Southern Command. My oldest son is getting married, so it's just complete chaos right now, and it has been chaos for the last 2 months getting ready for this. So
now, is this a shotgun wedding? Are you just holding them at shotgun, just forcing them to get married, or
old school, right? She is from Alabama, so there you go.
There's a dowry joke here. They're lovely people. They're both great. She is. So they're actually married. This is going to be on their first wedding anniversary. It'll be like they're actually. Was that because we didn't think they were going to make it? We just the odds were so low. We're like, why bother?
They're like the trial run.
Yeah.
No,
But now that they made it a year, we're like, all right, we'll get some Chick-fil-A on the beach. Call it a day.
There's a lot of, let's say, I'll call it family dynamics involved.
Oh, wow, that is a different show entirely.
Different show. Anyway, she's awesome. He's awesome. I look at her as a daughter, and that is about the best thing I could say. She's awesome.
It's funny. She told me she looks at you like a creepy old man.
All right. Well, moving on.
Sorry, this is the grief and exhaustion talking. Okay.
Yes, it's all right. It's quite all right. So our first story for today comes from the National Law Review, which I do believe is the first time we've had a story from the National Law Review. The title here is Qantas Airways Cuts Executive Pay After Cyber Incident, a governance signal for the industry. There's not a whole lot to the story. There was a breach at Qantas Airways, which is like the Delta Airlines of Australia. I guess that's probably the best equivalent I could come up with.
Yeah, it's a big carrier in Australia, big airline carrier.
So they had a breach a while back. They lost the data of about 5.7 million of their customers. I still don't know that the details of how that happened are public. But
I was trying to research that actually for the show, and I could not find it because it goes into my thoughts on this. Sorry, go ahead.
No, so the I'm assuming though that the company, like the insiders in the company, know the details, and the Qantas board decided that they were going to penalize the executives, right? So they withheld about 800,000. Actually, that's 800,000 Australian dollars, so like $500,000 US from the compensation packages of their executive team. It's not clear exactly how many people that's spread across, but it's still a non-trivial amount of money, and is interesting because outside of like when Target got hacked, and they mentioned the Target hack in here, there aren't a lot of publicly noticeable implications for executives that get oversee a entity that gets hacked.
You mean aside from CISOs occasionally being prosecuted?
Well, aside from that, but those are, in those instances, there were other factors in, like in the case of Uber, there was there was an allegation of malfeasance and, trying to cover it up. And in the case of SolarWinds, there was, an allegation that the CISO was making, basically false claims in his public appearances about the security of their, of their software and their company. Beyond that, like companies themselves don't typically, and they point this out in the article, companies themselves don't typically sanction executives who make bad decisions that lead to breaches. And quite frankly, I think they should. Like if you are, if you make a good decision and the company makes a lot of money because of your product strategy, your market strategy, whatever, you're gonna get rewarded as an executive, as a CISO, a COO, CFO. And the converse, in my view, should similarly. Now I should say, in certain circumstances, right? Like if it's outside of your control, but if you decide that, hey, like we're just, we're not going to fully fund the security program, we're going to make a decision to not do something that seems like, to a reasonable person to be a prudent step, then I don't think it should be surprising that they have some money withheld.
Yeah, I agree. And that was sort of the point that I had in my notes. I think it really depends on the root cause of the breach. If it's something that the executive leadership made a knowing, knowledgeable, impactful decision around it, then yes, I do think some financial liability would help drive better behavior. If it's something that to their best efforts and they were meeting all the best industry standards, but it was like a 0-day nation state super uber foo attack that blew past, reasonably solid defenses, then no, I think that there is an aspect of this of we can't stop everything. We can try, we can make it difficult, but I don't know that. But if it's something very obvious, like, hey, we chose not to implement MFA, like we had, another story about, because it was too expensive and annoying, and then they got phished and nailed. Yeah, exactly. That I think is a very well-known risk equation. And if you chose one side of the risk equation and in such a way that it didn't come back to bite you, then yeah, I fully agree with financial consequences to that decision at an executive level.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see if this becomes anything of a trend. In my experience, the board of directors, it would have to be the board of directors generally that would make that kind of a call. But in my experience, the CEO typically is also the chairman of the board of many public companies and also holds sway over the board. So I suspect in many companies, it's really not a feasible thing to have happen. But to the extent that it becomes a trend, it might be something to watch out for.
Yeah, I think it just depends on the governance setup and how independent like a risk governance body may be.
Absolutely. So not a lot of specific details to learn from there. I thought it was interesting to see a potentially impactful change in how companies react to breaches would be worth talking about. So the next story we have comes from Security Week, and the title here is "Ransomware Losses Climb as AI Pushes Phishing to New Heights." Holy cow. So there was a report published by this company named Resilience. They're they're affiliated in some way with cyber insurance market. I think they do like a meta-analysis of cyber insurance claims. And this story is basically about the outcome or the summary of that report. And so they noted that there was a reduction in vendor-related incidents or vendor-related risks. So keep in mind that in the past, the number of incidents associated with third parties has been like on a significant uptrend. And this report is saying that at least as it pertains to incidents that result in an insurance claim, the number of those has gone down is somewhat significantly in the first half of 2025. But they do point out that, this is a quote, while incidents dropped in frequency, the clients who experienced business interruption from a vendor-related incident had significant losses that rivaled losses from companies that were directly affected by ransomware. So basically, it's less common, but it's becoming more severe when it does happen. To the point where they're saying, to the point where it's as severe as if it were to happen to you directly. And then they point out that ransomware attacks increased dramatically. They said it was a 73% increase in the first quarter of 2025.
Which is interesting because we've recently seen some research about ransomware was declining. And then they're saying it increased. So, I mean, could be just their sampling versus somebody else's, could be the view they have. It's interesting. Yeah. Just a little bit of difference in some of the things we've heard.
I do think it is based on the population that you sample from. So I think that they're pulling their data from, organizations that have made claims against our cyber insurance. And so, maybe the way to think about it is there's 73% more cyber insurance claims resulting from ransomware than there was a year ago. Then where it gets quite interesting is, and there's another story that's similar to this later in the show, about how a lot of organizations are becoming savvy enough to defend against the kind of the modern ransomware trend of double extortion, where they both encrypt your data so it's it's unreadable, but they'll also steal a copy of it and then threaten disclosure. And what they're pointing out is that there's an increasing number of customers that have good backups and an ability to recover, and they've encrypted their own data so that if the bad actor tries to release it, they don't have the ability to actually release the unencrypted data. And so there's not a lot of incentive for the victim to pay. And so now there's some innovation happening, and they're calling it a triple extortion, where they're also threatening a denial of service attack.
Which, couldn't you just start there?
Yeah, I suppose.
Which we've seen a bunch of in the past, right? The extortion threats to not do. It's just interesting that I guess you don't need to do the first step to do a DDoS if you don't want to.
True. Well, it's probably really reduces the barrier to entry too. Then they talk about a case study with one of the customers of this entity who negotiated. They're talking about rather than just paying the ransom, like, you should try to negotiate it down. And they talk about how they had one particular entity that negotiated down from a $2 million to $615,000. And what a win that was. And I got to tell you, that just doesn't feel like a win to me.
It was, quoting from the article, it was the Chaos ransomware group, and quoting the article, using calculated delays, strategic radio silence, and psychological pressure tactics to wear down the attacker's patience were employed.
Oh, it was actually $4 million. The initial demand was $4 million, and they got it down to $615,000. So
wow,
such a bargain. Such a bargain.
Hey, look, if you're a ransomware negotiator, maybe you can get your fee based on a percentage of how much you reduce the demand. Yeah, well, there was a story a couple months ago about somebody who was playing both sides. So you got to be careful on that. So they also point out that the amount of ransomware claims has increased 17% year on year. So basically the demand, the fee demand, is continuing to grow. Just like everything else, inflation is affecting ransomware gangs. So I think we should not be surprised. The next. And, tariffs, ransomware no, that's not a thing yet.
I do wonder if, because I think there is in the budget bill that was passed, there was a tax on outbound financial transactions, like sending money overseas. And I wonder if, do you have to add 5% onto that $615,000? I don't know how that works.
Good question.
So the next interesting point in here was that during the first quarter of 2025, phishing became the primary initial point of failure for financial loss. So this one feels like a pendulum that just swings back and forth.
Yeah.
We've seen it. We've seen it workstation attacks. We've seen it be infrastructure attacks and phishing, and it just kind of like spins around. And I think that the genesis or the kind of the one of the nuts of this particular article is they're pointing out that AI appears to be a pretty significant enabler in phishing attacks being a lot more effective. And so they point out that they're saying that, well, they're citing CrowdStrike, who says that AI generated phishing campaigns have a 54% success rate compared to 12% for traditional attacks.
Something you and I have predicted for a while is going to come to pass. I mean, it's only one data point, but it's confirmation bias, so I'll take it.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. See, then the next interesting thing I thought in here was that the report notes that social engineering accounts for 42% of incurred claims and 88% of incurred losses in the first half of 2025.
So get that phishing resistance two-factor up and running, right? Or MFA.
Yes, and that includes vectors like email and voice, business email compromise attacks, click fix and file fix, which I think are on a like dramatic upswing. Mm-hmm. And then SIM swapping. And I have, by the way, they actually do talk about this in this article about how SIM swapping, which is kind of an old standby for a long time, is being made much more effective when paired with voice modifiers. So like if you can steal somebody's phone number through a SIM swap, and then you can mimic their voice using a voice synthesizer, that's a whole new level of...
Your boss calls you from his phone number and it sounds like him.
Exactly. I think we're going to have code words.
And I think like the phone companies could do more to fight SIM swapping, but they choose not to.
Yes.
If my SIM is in Atlanta and then suddenly shows up in Nairobi, that's a problem.
Right.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, there should be some impossible travel business logic they could apply. I agree. I do
just
think
multiple levels of authentication or something.
Yeah, I think a lot of the carriers now are providing you with the ability to lock your SIM. So like you have kind of like you can freeze your credit, right? Like I think a lot of them now let you freeze your SIM. And that leads to sad people when they order their new iPhone and they can't get the number to port.
Well, that is an interesting problem, right? If it becomes too complicated, you're going to get folks who are not super technical getting frustrated and tripped up by it, but just turning it off. And I don't know. I just feel like the mobile companies could do more here on SIM swapping.
Certainly agree. See, the next interesting point was on the prevalence of InfoStealer malware. And they said they saw an 800% increase, including over 1 billion corporate and personal email accounts being stolen. And that, by the way, matches, and I think I've mentioned this before, like I run a couple of free services, and I've had threat intelligence companies come to me and say, hey, like we took over this command and control host and we found, a whole bunch of your users who had this malware on their workstations, and maybe you should go and have them reset their passwords. So I know it's firsthand that it's a big problem.
Indeed.
Let's see. So they do they have some recommendations, which hopefully are not terribly surprising. For ransomware, regularly validate that you have robust backups. They do recommend, despite the comment earlier in the article about not paying the ransom, that should be your default position. The enabler to do that is to make sure that not only do you have the backups, but you're also encrypting the data yourself, so that if they do get a copy of it, it's encrypted. I think this is, by the way, is something that I did want to talk a little bit about, because I still to this day have had such a problem with data at rest encryption and kind of an understanding of that, right? Because like a lot of compliance programs and security regimes, policies and whatnot will prescribe data at rest encryption. And the one that makes me crazy is well, we'll run whole disk encryption.
Mm-hmm.
And then check, we got the data at rest encryption. And that, by the way, doesn't help at all in this. You have to think through what problem you're trying to solve. In that instance,
no, man, somebody's going to break into AWS and steal the drive that your data's on.
Exactly. So you have to be aware of what you're trying to defend against.
Not to say that encryption isn't super valuable, but you have to understand the attack chain, right? And if your encryption is such that it's abstracted away, if somebody comes in with the likely account type that somebody's going to come in with, it doesn't buy you anything. You've got to make sure that it's not just encrypted, but that the authorization, authentication around it is sufficient that the bad actor doesn't also get automatic decryption as part of their connection.
Correct. So for example, if someone is able to connect to a database through the normal database service using legitimate credentials, they're able to run a query and they can pull back the data. It doesn't matter that you're using even database level encryption if the user that they have connected with has the ability to pull that data back in an unencrypted form. They've got an unencrypted copy of your database.
Now, where it does help is, let's say you have row level encryption turned on and only specific accounts can decrypt it. Then you can even hide that data from the local admins. You just have to think it through and understand the options and what they do and how they work and who has the automatic decryption pipeline built into their accounts.
And it can get quite sophisticated and also quite expensive. It is in certain instances it's worth it. Right. It can be quite slow. Yes. And high overhead.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So moving on, we have a next story from Bleeping Computer, and the title here is Hackers Left Empty-Handed After Massive NPM Supply Chain Attack. So holy crap, my eyes were bleeding for a week with all of the news of this hack. The headlines were about, NPM packages with 3 billion weekly downloads were hacked and hijacked. And while that is actually true, the point of the article here was, despite the apparent scale of the attack, which, by the way, resulted from this guy named Josh Junin, whose handle is Quix, fell for the same NPM credential phishing that has been happening now for the last couple of months. He didn't have multi-factor authentication. And by the way, to his credit, by the way, he got on X the next day and said what happened. This is the email I got. I fell for it. And he was super, super transparent about what happened and owned up to it and said that he turned on multi-factor authentication and whatnot. But be that as it may, this article is pointing out that this attacker tainted these packages, which do have a very high number of downloads per week. Wiz, to their part, says that the tainted packages, the infected packages, landed in 10% of cloud environments, though those packages were only available for 2 hours.
Yeah, that is wild, the auto update timeframes. Which, by the way, we always preach for: auto update. Here's the one exception to that rule where it bites you.
Right. So the malicious code that was installed into these packages was targeted client side. So it wasn't targeted at the server side. It was targeted at web browsers, and specifically at web browsers that were used to do different cryptocurrency stuff, right? And so it was designed to redirect transactions. You basically, at the last minute, it would substitute a destination wallet that you thought you were sending money to another wallet. And apparently it worked, but it only netted them in this particular attack, it netted them less than $5.
Oops. And overall less than 1,000, right? Yeah.
Yeah. I think it was okay, no, it was $20.05. So it was $5 worth of Ethereum and $20 worth of some virtually unknown meme coin. And then there was a parallel attack happening on DuckDB, which was not part of the initial story, but a similar kind of thing befell DuckDB, and that one did net, I think, about $600 in total. So, and they also point out, by the way, that the wallets that were used to collect this money have now been marked, and so they actually can't get the money out without people figuring out who they are. So that was a whole lot of work for not a lot of reward. But here's what struck me about this is that, like, with the fish, like this actor fished one person, and they were able to get their malicious code running on 10% of cloud systems in, like hours.
Well, Wiz also said that 99% of the environments they monitor used at least one of those packages. That's amazingly widespread.
If this had been a different attack, like this could have been, way worse than what we saw with CrowdStrike in Windows. Like this could have been catastrophic. And that's, by the way, not to say that, like, behind the scenes, though there were only $1,000 or less than $1,000 stolen across both attacks, the amount of work that companies had to do to clean up after this mess was probably astronomical. But I am concerned about the relative ease with which this actor was able to get malicious code distributed so pervasively. It's great, by the way. It's awesome that it was caught so fast. Like it was caught within 2 hours. That's great, but it still was a massive problem. And so I am, I'm really concerned at what this says about our ecosystem. If this had been something that did, let's say, create reverse shells or was destructive for the hosts that ran on or what have you, like this could have been just devastating. And I'm also concerned that the actors who are, have that kind of an aim are watching these kinds of attacks, saying like, this is the way to do it.
Yeah. Well, and hopefully the flip side is open source folks are also watching this attack and becoming wiser and more hardened against that.
Yes.
Hopefully. And so,
every time this happens, I think we get a little bit better. Like this guy now has his 2-factor turned on, which is great. And hopefully other people fell in line as well. But boy, I think the threat is getting well ahead of our ability to manage it.
I would agree. And we see, maybe it's our selection bias, but we see more and more and more stories about going after dependency supply chain all the time these days, it seems. It seems to become very in vogue with the attackers.
Yes. So I go back to the importance of having something of a reasonable program wrapped around your development pipeline.
Though in this case, everything would have looked legit. Everything would have looked perfectly normal. You're trusting everything would look like it was intended by that developer, and you trust that developer. So, I mean, you could go like, hey, I'm not going to auto download for 24 hours or 36 hours or 48 hours or whatever. You could maybe build that kind of thing in for this particular case. I don't know. Good point. It's a tough one. I mean,
it's a good point.
I don't know. I really have to think about it some more. Maybe you leg everything by a week and hope that in that week time, any problems have been sorted.
Yeah, I don't know.
Then again, if you've got a nasty bug that you need to fix, are you going to wait a week just out of the abundance of caution?
No.
And then can you afford to do each of those decisions as a bespoke one-off decision? Or do you just have to build a process? Because you probably have hundreds, if not thousands of these dependencies in your code tree.
Yes.
So, I don't know. It's a tough one.
Rolling the dice. All right. Our next story comes from the Register, and the title here is Huntress's Hilarious Attacker Surveillance Splits the InfoSec Community.
Caught bits and pieces of this on the social medias.
This article was the first I actually heard of this. So the story here is that a bad actor who was, off doing his criminal stuff was worried about, rightly so, the security of his desktop. And so presumably it's a he, downloaded an EDR trial package from Huntress. It's managed EDR trial, and that's where this all starts. So this comes from a blog post, and it's actually a pretty interesting blog post, and I would invite everybody to go read it. But the controversy here is that this bad actor, again, did install this EDR agent. Huntress, because it's a managed EDR agent, realized that some of the other events they were monitoring from, this is their story, right? So take it for what it is. Some of the events on their other customers appeared to be coming from the same IP address that this EDR agent was running on. So that kind of cued them in to go look at what was going on there. And they realized that host was being used as an attack platform. And so they monitored it over the course of 90 days. And they saw all sorts of badness. What was quite interesting was how, and this is my words, right? I'm characterizing my assessment. The person started off with some ideas of what they wanted to accomplish. Over the course of 3 months, like, they figured out how to leverage AI. They built pipelines using Make.com automation. They did a whole bunch of stuff that turned what apparently was an idea into some actual reality. Now, it's unclear because this was only like a partial view into what was going on. They couldn't actually see how the attacks were being perpetrated, because this was just part of the infrastructure. It wasn't the whole shooting match. But what is caused a lot of controversy, and I'm really surprised about this, and this is the thing that I wanted to talk about, was there's a segment of the security community who's just aghast at the privacy invasion of Huntress monitoring and then disclosing the activities of this entity. I ran into this a bunch of times, in the context of CrowdStrike and a couple of VDR agents, that people generally aren't aware of the amount of access those agents provide to the systems they run on. And broadly speaking, it's like anything. Like, you can pull back any file, you can run anything, you can push software, you can do anything through those agents. And the only restrictions, typically in my experience, has been on the management side. You can do things like, don't let Jerry look at files. Like, you can, but that doesn't change the functionality of the agent. It's all based on the settings in the control plane.
Yeah, if anything, the problem is there's so much log data being brought back of every little tiny thing that goes on that you can't retain it for very long because it's so massive, that the log stream. So it's EDRs are super insightful, but they also generate a ton of log data.
Yes.
And
yes. So,
I think anybody who's run this in a corporate environment knows that. I think I was confused by the outrage. I guess part of it is, hey, we didn't know you could do that, versus, is this an ethical and appropriate use of the tool when you're being hired to protect this person and now you're turning around and burning them when they were relying on you to protect them, which I think could be part of the argument.
So I guess I have a couple of thoughts. A, it was a trial. B, they were
read the terms and conditions?
They were using it to perform criminal acts, and C, obviously they didn't read the terms and conditions.
Yeah.
So I don't feel bad. I mean, there's a lot of, I think there's a lot of broad carve outs for a lot of data privacy laws when it comes to keeping artifacts that pertain to crime, right? So like, you can't, if you're in Europe, you can't call the police and exercise your right to be forgotten and have them get rid of your arrest records. Like, that's not how it works. So I can a bit. I think this was a value, kind of a net add, but I also think it was perhaps eye-opening to the community on the capabilities of these agents, and that's not a bad thing.
No, yeah. I mean, they're powerful. I think at the end of the day, I agree with you. I'd rather Huntress use a bad actor's dumb OPSEC against them and share their findings with the community. But I can see the other arguments against it, but I think I'm okay with it. I think I need to think about it some more.
I suspect that there are some people who are assuming that this is an indication that Huntress is just like looking at their customers. And my strong suspicion is that there's just too much. Like they don't have that ability. Something would have to cause them to put their focus on a particular agent or customer.
And for a paid contractual engagement, there's probably other, you can look at the terms, you can negotiate those terms. There's probably other criteria in there than what comes with a trial.
Yep. Agreed. Anyway, it is, the blog post is linked in this article, and I think it's worth a read because it really gives you some perspective on how I don't is from that side of the keyboard. And I bet you on the other side of the keyboard, like if you were the target of or the victim of this person's attack, it probably looked pretty sophisticated.
Yeah.
So
fair enough.
All right, our next story comes from Security Affairs, and the title here is LunaLock ransomware threatens victims by feeding stolen data to AI models. This is the one that I alluded to a little bit ago. Look, the ransomware is, I feel like we're getting to peak ransomware. Everybody's had it.
And then new and interesting things will occur.
Everybody's had it. And that we've kind of stagnated, although, the story we just talked about a little bit ago, you talked about a little bit of innovation on injecting DDoS attacks to incentivize victims to pay. But outside of that, it's like the double extortion has been kind of the method of operation for a fairly long time now. And what this is doing, now this is a little bit situational, but I think it goes to the model that these ransomware actors are trying to evolve, right? They're trying to figure out more effective ways at getting victims to pay. In this instance, there was this organization called Artists and Clients. It's a website where you can, if you're an artist, you can post your art, and purchasers can buy your art and whatnot. And this ransomware actor stole the art, and is not necessarily directly just going to the victim. They're also going to the customers or like the visitors of the site who have uploaded their art, and they're telling them, hey, you need to go and tell this Artists and Clients company that they need to pay the ransom, because if they don't, we're going to feed your art into the training data sets of the major AI providers. And the interesting thing there is that once that happens, like you can't extract that out. And this is a huge point of consternation in the art industry right now. That, whether it's book writing, like they make a mention of I think it was Perplexity that settled for $1.5 billion. No, it was Anthropic. Sorry, Anthropic. So settled for $1.5 billion for scraping pirated books and putting them in their training data. And it's really hard to get it out. Like once it's been incorporated, it's very hard to get out. And there's a lot of, especially in the image, there's a lot of innovation happening right now on image generating LLMs. And a lot of that relies on robust training data. And so there's a lot of consternation in the art world about, when you see these LLM generated images, that's being created based off of data that was almost certainly stolen from other artists. And so this is like, in my view, playing on the fears and concerns of the artists. And so I thought it was a novel way, and I don't think it's going to be the last sort of thing. This is very narrowly focused, like this particular avenue is very narrowly focused, but I think it's an example of how we're going to start seeing ransomware actors trying to find like the pressure points on customers that might not be like what we've seen in the past.
Yeah. And you kind of mentioned this too, and it's a little, the one point I had is that this isn't like you can go do a data deletion takedown request. It's, if it's in the training set, it's, look, I don't know this at an expert level, but as I understand it, it's more like that's a drop of water in the ocean. How are you going to get that drop of water back out? It's just not viable at scale, at least. It's not. So it's kind of a one way thing, right? You put it in, it's never coming back. At least as I understand it today. I guess maybe I could be wrong, but it's pretty scary in that sense.
Yeah. And even if it is, like, if you are the victim here, your alternatives are to either pay and hope that they honor their promise to not submit it, or you have to go through the same sort of legal battle that the authors went through with Anthropic. Who I mean, I don't know how much money they had to spend in order to get there, but I think that was a very long court case, and there's no guarantee that you're going to win. And I think in the Anthropic case, they were ordered to excise the works from their training model, but I think it would require them to actually go through their training data, remove all that stuff, and then create brand new models and then publish those models, which I think is extraordinarily complicated and a long process. If you're just an indie artist, like you're going to be banging on this company to pay the damn ransom so they don't put your data there.
Or you just use it for exposure. You're like, hey, you know what? My art is going to train some of the best AI models out there.
It's true. It's true. I should just put a little footnote.
Spin it. Yeah.
Just credit all the people whose art.
Right.
Yes, that's clearly the solution. All right, and then the last story we have for today comes from Security Affairs, and the title here is FBI warns of Salesforce attacks by UNC 6040 and 6395. So this is just I would say an official recognition of what everybody's been talking about in the damn industry for the past 6 months. So there's two main.
Let me just start up front and say I have to be very careful here because this talks about my company. So
yes. So I may have
very little commentary on this one,
yeah.
But carry on.
So there's two major attack types here. We've talked about them in the past, right? There's the phishing angle where I think it's the 6040 is known to basically phish employees and trick them into establishing a connection with a data loader, either the official Salesforce data loader or something that they've created custom to do this. And they have various tactics and techniques to bypass things like MFA and whatnot. And then the other one is by stealing credentials and stealing tokens and API keys and whatnot. And they do that, I would say that they do that directly from victims, but they also do it as a result of the first attack type, because that's one of the things they're looking for in the Salesforce data is other keys that they can use to further, interrogate other Salesforce tenants looking for even more keys. And I still don't know exactly if anybody knows what their end game is, other than to just hoover up all of the data that is stored in Salesforce. I don't know beyond that. So train your employees so that hopefully they do not fall for these types of attacks, and making sure that they're not just trusting people who call them up and say, hey, I need you to grant access for this particular application. That can come via phone, it can come via text message or direct message. It can come many different ways, but also making sure that you limit the people who can do that.
Right.
If
and ideally, maybe somehow, I don't know if this is possible, but somehow I have two people need to agree before a new third-party app is added to Salesforce. I don't know what the options are in Salesforce, but
yeah. So they point out that enforcing MFA, applying least privilege, I think is important. If you don't have access, if a person doesn't have access to grant that connection, then they don't have the ability to be phished like that.
Mm-hmm.
Restricting based on IP access. Not every service is going to have that. I said that before, and I'll say it again now. Salesforce is the center of the storm right now. Like the hurricane is squarely over top of Salesforce right now. That will change. It was 2 years ago, it was Microsoft's, Office 365. But right now it's Salesforce. In a year, I don't know what it'll be. It'll be probably something else. But the facts will be the same or similar. Like they'll be approaching it in similar ways, making sure that any keys that you have in code is stored properly, that your repositories are properly protected, et cetera, et cetera. So none of this is magic. It's all stuff we've talked about in the past. This actor is exceptionally busy right now. Get out there. If you're a Salesforce customer, man, I would be really looking at your situation, because this is impacting many, many, many companies right now. And get your vendor management spreadsheets ready. This is the perfect time to make sure those questions are all up to date.
Correct. I can't say anything, but I have so many things I want to say, but I can't.
I know.
In time, someday, when I'm not covered by ethical and NDA concerns.
All right. So anything more to say, or you want to wrap it?
No, just thanks to everybody for listening and continuing to support us and bearing with us as we go through crazy times in our personal lives.
Yes, indeed. Well, I hope everybody has a great week. In the meantime, you can find links to the stories we talked about today on our website at defensivesecurity.org. You can follow Mr. Callett where?
On X, and your amazing Mastodon instance, InfoSec.exchange, by the same handle on both, Lerg, L-E-R-G.
Awesome. And you can find me on Mastodon. It's at Jerry at InfoSec.exchange. And once again, thank you very much to our Patreon sponsors. Thank you so much. And also go follow that YouTube channel. Thank you very much, and we will talk again next week. Take care.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.